Alright, so I promised you I was going to record a video with my top 10 CRM admin rules. These rules were essentially created over the years. I started, as a lot of you know, as a CRM administrator installing Dynamics CRM 3.0 for a company back in 2006, and I sort of worked my way up to Senior Solution Architect, which is where I am. So I wanted to create this video of the top 10 rules, but unfortunately I have to leave town tonight. I didn't want to keep waiting though, so I thought it would be a good idea if I bring you with me on the trip and we'll sort of tackle these rules along the way. So for rule number 1 for the CRM administrator, I actually thought of, what does it mean to pack for some of these business trips. Now when you pack for a 5-day business trip, it's pretty easy to be able to fit 5 days worth of clothing into a bag. The problem is when you're gone for much longer than that. Like in my case, I'm about to leave on a trip for 6 or 7 weeks, so I need to be smart about the way I pack, which reminded me of rule number 1. Rule number 1 of the CRM administrator is keep it simple. Let me show you what that means when it comes to packing. So for this trip, for 6 or 7 weeks, all I'm taking is my European size carry-on bag, which is way smaller than the US. It's 21 inches, so it's pretty tiny. I customized mine with a big number 2 on it, just so I can spot it from the distance. And on top of that, just my backpack with my computer and some of the other electronics, but that's it. You have to keep it simple because again, nothing you take will be able to cover you for 6 or 7 weeks. You have to keep it simple. And the same applies to CRM Online or to Dynamics 365 customizations. You should never try to go out there and try to win the Nobel Prize of CRMing with some of these customizations. You need to keep it simple. By keeping it simple, it's a lot easier to upgrade and maintain. It's a lot easier to train your users on that process. It's a lot easier to train other admins to support it. So always try to think of the easiest solution you can when it comes to resolving some of these business outcomes you're trying to achieve. First up, Madrid. One of the things I'm going to miss while I'm gone is that they're going to demolish the Georgia Dome. There's going to be an implosion of this 25-year-old stadium that has seen Super Bowls and Olympics and all these other sports and events. And I really don't understand why we have this obsession with just tearing down things that are barely new. I mean, 25 years is nothing. I was walking last night by the Royal Theater here in Madrid, and this theater was built in 1818. It went actually operational in 1850 as an opera house, and it has been repurposed to be a concert hall and a regular theater, and now it's back to an opera house, one of the best ones in Europe actually. And repurposing buildings actually reminded me of rule number 2, which is check before you create new things, right? It's important that you realize that there's over 300 entities in Dynamics, over 6,000 fields and hundreds of views and charts and different things you can actually leverage out of the box. You don't have to create new things. Every time you add something new to Dynamics, you're actually slowing it down. You're adding tables to the database, you're adding complexity. So we want to try to leverage what we have as much as possible. Now, this is not to be confused with actually repurposing something inside of Dynamics 365 that it wasn't created for, right? It's okay to rename number of employees to number of users or number of licenses if your company sells software, for example. It's okay to rename the account entity to companies or organizations because the account entity was created to track organizations after all. But you don't want to do something like renaming the leads entity to prospect, for example, to track people who you're trying to hire, prospecting hires, just because your company doesn't use the lead entity as part of their sales process. Because what will happen inevitably is a few months later, you will make an acquisition or maybe release another product and you will realize that you need the lead entity after all. So you don't want to replace something or reuse something for what it wasn't created for. You want to repurpose something that won't affect the way Dynamics 365 was created or the way it operates. So again, rule number 2 is check before you create instead of adding new things and adding more complexity, but be smart about it. remember watching Rocky IV, which is my favorite Rocky movie, by the way, and thinking immediately that I wanted to come to Russia. But not because of the reasons that most people have, like Ivan Drago, for example. I think most people remember Ivan Drago from the movie. I wanted to come here because I lived in a South American country where even the coldest night of the year was super hot. We had no seasons, and I remember watching Rocky training in like waist deep snow and thinking, man, I want to go there someday. I want to go to Siberia someday. I later found out that it was really filmed in Wyoming, and I still have to go to Jackson Hole to check that out. But you know, now that I'm here and it's freezing cold, I just feel that Siberia must be a just awful place, right? And thinking about the people that get sent there to like a Siberian gulag and how tough that can be. I mean, you might as well be dead. Which reminds me of rule number 3. Rule number 3 is to never allow your users to delete records. You can allow people to deactivate records, which is like sending people to Siberia, basically. Records disappear. They don't show up in active records views. They don't show up when you try to find records through quick find or advanced find. They just vanish out of the system. And if you're in CRM Online, where records essentially, you know, if you delete them, they're gone. And obviously you can go through a disaster recovery process, and we do have some new advances that allow us to recover our own backups, but it's still a hassle, so it's not worth it. Just go through your security roles, remove delete permissions, but not from all the entities. Just remove it from the entities that make sense, that you know what they are. If you see any entities that have a weird name, just let it be. Don't change anything. But on the ones that you know what they are, you know the ones that you're using, just go ahead and remove delete permissions, allow your users to deactivate, teach them how to deactivate. It causes almost the same effect, but they're easy to recover. So rule number 3, allow users to deactivate records. A friend of mine told me that New Zealand is essentially a more beautiful Australia. He said that anything that is beautiful in Australia is just more beautiful in New Zealand, which made me feel like perhaps Australia is like a testing environment with only the very best functionality making it to New Zealand, or our production environment. All of the ugly mess and trial and error, well, mostly error, will happen on a dev environment, which I guess, using my country analogy, that would be... Anyway, rule number 4 of the CRM admin is to never directly customize production. You need to follow an application lifecycle management methodology that allows you to deploy new functionality into production only after it has been planned, developed, and tested in other environments to ensure they work as designed. Okay, so I'm here in Vienna, the capital of Austria. Opera House on the left. Fun fact about Austria. Austria is a country lying on the Alps, and actually only 32% of the country, it's under 500 meters. So that means that people here have to get used to, you know, living on the mountains and studying on the mountains, going to school or working on the mountains, and obviously that means that they have to build houses and schools and offices and all of that on the mountains, and that's really hard to do when you don't have the right tools. Which reminds me of rule number 5. Rule number 5 is use tools. Make your job easier as a CRM administrator. You know, my favorite tools out there are free. You can, you know, check out the links below. I added some of my favorite tools, but you can always go to xrmtoolbox.com, or you can go to github.com and get the tools to help your job be a lot easier. So rule number 5, use tools.
Until 1989, Poland was a communist country. But since our first 3 elections, Poland has been going through huge changes, making it now the 5th largest economy in the European Union and the 23rd largest economy in the world.
Implementing changes like this is really hard to make it successful at a macro level without following a change management system or methodology, and the same applies to Dynamics 365. So rule number 6 is follow a change management methodology when implementing new functionality, upgrades, or whatever new changes to the users. This will increase your chances of user adoption, and it will also minimize the impact on their day-to-day productivity. So whichever system you use, I personally like to follow the ADKAR method for change management or the methodology, but there are other solutions out there. So whichever you decide to choose, Rule number 6 is follow a change management methodology to increase your chances of success. Walking around Chicago is awesome as long as you know what you're doing. You make a wrong turn and you can find yourself on the other side of the water, like in this parking lot, when you were trying to get to this other parking lot. And fixing that fact will require a lot of work, which can be a huge pain depending on traffic downtown, or worse yet, you can end up in the wrong side of town, which could mean losing everything you have. Creating custom fields in Dynamics 365 follows the same principle, and that's because the data type on the custom fields cannot be changed after the field is created, which means that if you realize too late that the field you created has the wrong data type or format, you could end up having to do a lot of work, or well, risk losing all of your data because you didn't follow proper procedure when you implemented the fix. So follow these simple rules to save yourself some time and headaches in the future. The first field creation rule is use global option sets. When you say yes to using a global option set, you get to check if there's one out there that you can use instead of creating a new one, which goes with our rule number 2. If there's nothing there, well, you can save a new one, and if you ever need it again, you'll be good to go. There are a couple of other benefits of using global option sets, but that's for another video. The second field creation rule is never use whole numbers. Whole number fields are a pain because you can't convert them into decimal numbers, which means that if your organization determines they need to start collecting decimal numbers on an existing whole number field, you will have to struggle and make that change. It is better to create a decimal number field and set the precision to 0. It will make the numbers look like whole numbers, but you can always change the precision later on and increase the decimal count if you need it. Lastly, stay away from 2 option fields. The main reason is that you cannot add more options later. So if you added a field that required 2 options because you only captured 2 possible values right now, there's a chance they can change their mind in the future. Here's an example from a real project I did a few years ago. I implemented Dynamics 365 for a company that refinanced people's homes. And I created a custom entity to track all of the data for the loans. One of the fields was gender, and obviously they required 2 options at a time, female and male. I made the field a 2-option field, and about a year and a half later, the company decided to start loaning to businesses. So they requested a 3rd option to be added to the gender field. And obviously, because I used a 2-option field, I wasn't able to change it, so I had to redo all the work and do it as an option set instead. I only like using 2-option fields when I need a checkbox. I'll give you one extra tip when it comes to working with custom entities, and that is to never set the ownership level to the organization setting. And that's because setting the ownership level to organization is not really flexible. It doesn't give you a lot of options in the future. What I like to do is I like to set it to the user or team level and then set the security roles all the way to the organization level of access. That makes the custom entity behave like an organization-owned entity, but it's actually user or team-owned, which means that in the future you can always dial it down to business unit or parent-child business unit, but something that you won't be able to do with an organization-owned entity is to be able to dial it down. It's all or nothing. So always set the ownership level to user or team, and then always in the future you can always dial it back. So again, rule number 7 is use field creation rules to save yourself some headaches and wasted time in the future. I'm here in Slovakia for a couple of days, and I want to talk about this country because it's split into 8 self-governing regions. And the idea of this decentralized approach is that each region can create multi-phase policies that better suit their citizens, because they know their citizens better than the central government. And that reminds me of rule number 8. Rule number 8 is use decentralized command. The idea of decentralized command is that you as a CRM administrator get pulled into all kinds of directions. Everybody's asking you to do all kinds of stuff. So why don't you take someone, on the sales leadership, for example, and allow them to deal with business process flows, or maybe someone from IT and allow them to do user management, like resetting passwords, adding users, that kind of stuff, or maybe helping you with instance management and helping you with backups and restores and upgrades. But the idea is, again, you give them the chance to own their respective areas. You give them the opportunity to be autonomous even. Teach them best practices so they can take care of things and help you out. So once again, rule number 8, use Decentralized Command. Man, Europe is cold. Time to head out to a warmer destination. I love watching documentaries, and one of the best documentary series I've seen in the last couple of years is called Planet Earth 2. The last episode of the series actually features cities, and it was interesting to see how animals not only can adapt, but they can actually thrive on cities that are essentially designed to be the opposite of nature. One of the cities that was prominently featured in the episode was Singapore. And Singapore was featured because they've been able to implement changes and innovation that makes it more conducive to nature. And the changes and innovation they have applied has been done by proactively following an ethos to build a city within a garden. And it clearly paid off. Singapore today has the highest biodiversity of any other city on Earth. So when you walk by places like what you see behind me, Gardens by the Bay, you can see that the biodiversity is huge. And actually, when you see all of these different plants and animals and just all over the city as you drive around and see, how many different kinds of plants and animals are out there, you start to think like, how hard would it be to replicate the same results on the city where we live? And it just looks like a super daunting task, maybe impossible task for some cities, which reminds me of those times when people ask me, Gus, how do you know so much? How do you have time to learn all this stuff? And by stuff, they mean obviously sales and customer service and project service, field service, Power BI, all this other stuff. And really the answer to it is rule number 9, which is be proactive. You see, the trick to learn all this stuff is by staying on top of things, by just paying attention when Microsoft releases things and be the first ones to try it and play with it and try to break it. Really, that's the best way in which you can learn all of these different things and what they really represent for your company. We really love to learn new functionality as it comes out so we can figure out how our customers can benefit from it, and I definitely recommend that to you. If you really focus just on the version that you're using and more specifically even the functionality that you're using within the version you have, let's say you're using CRM 2011 and you only use a few features within CRM 2011 and that's all you learn about, then it's really hard to be able to learn all this other stuff that me and other MVPs and other experts are familiar with. The trick is to be proactive. Stay on top of the roadmap. Participate on the technology preview programs. Be the first one to test things and look for bugs. I guarantee you that you will see how the knowledge and the experience you have with Dynamics 365 will increase. And finally, we wrap up our trip here from Redmond at the Microsoft Advanta campus, where the Dynamics 365 product team works hard to create functionality to help your organization achieve more.
So regardless of where you live, the industry you work, or the language you speak, there will always be somebody to help you, a lending hand. All you have to do is remember to reach out.
Yep, reach out to the community. There's tons of people out there, hundreds of MVPs and experts on Twitter. There are hundreds or maybe dozens of groups on LinkedIn. And obviously you can always go to conferences like the places where Param and people from his team talk about and share all their skills and expertise and insights with people and obviously people like you and administrators that try to get the most out of the features of Dynamics 365, out of the technology that comes out of this place. So once again, plenty of places to go to. Join the Dynamics 365 community. Join the CRM user group, attend the local chapter meetings. I will put all those links to all those places on the description of this video.
But once again, remember, rule number 10 is reach out. Reach out to figure out how we can add more value, how Dynamics 365 can add more value to your organization.
Reach out.
Thank you.
All right, so we're finally back from our trip, and I wanted to go really quick through a summary of the rules that we learned over the last 20 minutes or so. In Atlanta, we saw rule number 1. Rule number 1 is to keep it simple, right? Try to avoid complexity. It's a lot easier to administer. In Madrid, we saw rule number 2, check before create, right? Again, tons and tons of entities and fields that you can leverage, so there's no need to add complexity for no reason. Then in Moscow, we saw rule number 3, allow users to deactivate, right? It's a lot better than deletion. Deleting on the cloud is tough to recover, so deactivating is pretty much like deleting. Rule number 4, in Auckland, don't customize production. Use an application lifecycle management to deploy functionality from your development environment to testing and then later to production. In Vienna, we saw rule number 5, use tools, right? Make your life easier as an administrator. Tons of these tools are free. My favorite tools are always free anyway. Rule number 6, in Warsaw with Cuba as a guest, use a change management methodology. It's a lot easier to implement change at a macro level and increase your chances of user adoption if you're following a methodology. Then for rule number 7, we went to Chicago. In Chicago, we learned that rule number 7 is follow best practices when it comes to field creation and addition. Try not to set yourself up for failure by digging yourself into a hole. Pick the right field data types. That way you don't have to change them in the future. In Slovakia, Bratislava, rule number 8, use Decentralized Command, right? You're gonna need help. There's a lot of, you get pulled in all kinds of directions. So you wanna make sure that you get some people the ability to help you out with some administrative tasks. Don't make them system admins, but at least let them help you a little bit. Then in Singapore, rule number 9, be proactive, right? Being proactive is essential to keep up with whatever is new when Microsoft releases new functionality, when Microsoft releases new apps. Staying on top of things and learning them as they come out is the best way to stay up to speed. And finally, we wrapped up our trip from Redmond or Seattle with rule number 10. Rule number 10 is to reach out. Right? We have a great community out there. Tons and tons of MVPs and experts, groups on LinkedIn. Follow us on Twitter. Reach out to us. We're there to help you. Chances are if you're running through some problems or if you're having some challenges, there's someone out there who already went through the same problem. So make sure you reach out. Reach out to the community. Reach out to the CRM user group. Reach out to us on Twitter and we'll be happy to help you. I hope you enjoyed coming along for this trip. It was a long trip. It was about 7 weeks, but I can't wait to see where I get to go next year. Hopefully I'll get to see you there.